your hands on top of your head.
Well, I didn't.
Now!
And I'll bet your mother had a loud bark.
Good morning. This is Morning Coffee with the Chief, and I'm your host, Patrick Jordan, here on Pop Culture Minefield. You can find us both on YouTube and on Rumble every Tuesday at 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. We go over police or crime-related movies and hopefully in the future TV shows, and we review them based upon our experience as law enforcement officers. Generally, I have guests who have served decades in law enforcement, and we talk about the movie, talk about our experiences, and talk about what is going on today. Now, I have a great movie today. We're going to do the Warriors, but before I get into the Warriors, I want to talk about the Los Angeles Mission. Los Angeles Mission is it's downtown Los Angeles. It's in Skid Row, and it services the needs of the people on Skid Row, the homeless on Skid Row. And I just want to talk a little bit about the realities of Skid Row. The vast majority of people on Skid Row are African American. The vast majority of people dying on Skid Row are African American men, mostly from drug overdoses as fentanyl and methamphetamine. And the Los Angeles Mission is down there in the midst of this, fighting a good fight, and they've been there for 85 years. They provide 400,000 meals a year. They provide temporary beds for people who want some shelter, and they use that opportunity in the relationship with the people on Skid Row to eventually get people off Skid Row that are willing and able and ready to get off. And when they do that, they have wraparound services for 6 to 12 months. They tailor a plan for a person. They inclusive of cognitive behavioral therapy programs. So they're just the gold standard if you're going to get somebody off drugs and deal with their criminogenic issues so that they could reintegrate to society. The Los Angeles Mission has the key to success. They recognize that it takes time, though, for everybody, because everybody in their program generally will relapse 1 or 2 times. But they stay with it, and they get people off drugs, off the streets, and reintegrated back into society. But they do it primarily with donor money. Now, they do get some money from government nowadays because government's desperate for good programs that work. But they do depend on seed money from the public. And so I want you to go to the losangelesmission.org and make a donation today. $25. $50, $75, $100, any amount will help. Remember, they give them food. They feed people every single day. They pass out some basic necessities like underwear, underclothing, socks, and shoes, which are critically important to the homeless community, and offer them services when they're ready to get off the street. So that's the Los Angeles Mission. So today we're gonna do the movie The Warriors, and let me bring on. Now, I only got one guest today, so if asked the producer extraordinaire, Martin, will join us. So Martin's going to join in the conversation. He said he really liked the movie The Warriors. And my other guest is going to be Chief Ralph Ornelas. He retired from the Westminster Police Department, did 30 plus years in law enforcement, inclusive of decades with the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, where he retired at the rank of commander. And Ralph and I never worked directly with each other, but we collaborated and worked together in the same areas, particularly in custody towards the end of our careers. And Ralph has been on the show several times now. I wanted Ralph on the show, and I was hoping to get another New Yorker on the show because The Warriors is set in New York. And as I did my research, it actually was more realistic than I would have known, being a boy from Detroit. I wasn't aware of all the stuff going on in New York. And this movie, The Warriors, had a lot more realism than I understood. But let's talk. Let me introduce the movie, and then we'll talk a little bit about what New York was going through at the time, and then we'll talk about some New York street gang lifestyle. But this movie was released in 1979, let me get to my page with the Warriors up here. And it was based upon a book by Sol Urich, released in 1965, and it's on the same name. And it's an action thriller film, and it's very entertaining, particularly for young guys. Macho, machismo, and some toxic masculinity there, I think, throughout the movie. All the things that are bad today, but they existed in 1979. And it's about basically this gang that finds itself down in I think it's Brooklyn or the Bronx where they end up at, and they have to fight their way back to Coney Island. And we'll get into a little of that. But first I wanted to talk about what was going on in New York at the time. This was in the 1970s. Hey, hello. We got a few guys joining us. I thank you, Roman of the Empire. Hello to you. But in the 1970s, New York was kind of on its knees, Ralph, right? It was in a financial crisis, and it was didn't know how it was going to pay its debt. It was looking at potential bankruptcy, so it was a pretty rough time period for New York in the 1970s, right?
Well, first of all, thanks a lot for being on your show again, Pat. Enjoy it immensely. As I watched that movie in preparation for today, it brought me back to my teenage years in the 70s and working loading docks and Maspeth and Brooklyn. And, it was gritty. It was gritty. My desires at that time as a young man wanted to be in law enforcement. And the reason I preface that is because NYPD was going through a very difficult time, with Lindsay and Beam, and then Mayor Mike Ed Koch was the mayor during the movie when this movie was made. But even before that, he was the mayor, and Mayor Koch actually was a pretty honorable man, but you're right. It was the budget wasn't good, economy wasn't good. NYPD officers were leaving for Houston and South, and even going to LA and across the country because they were laying people off. And public safety once again was on the forefront of what's going to happen in New York City. And so you set the stage right there, Pat, and based also on some of my life experience, working in the loading docks in the 70s, everybody was out to get something. Guys that I worked with, everybody had a side gig. Who was running the numbers, and who's these guys breaking into the trailers and stealing stuff. And some families everybody had the same winter coats and the same cookware. It really was pretty much, who could grab the most. And gangs have been historic in New York City for that. You go back to the times of the 1860s with Eastman's and the 40 Thieves. And I wrote down some of the names here.
The Dead Rabbits.
The Rabbits,
the Pug
Eastman,
Uglies, whatever.
The five points.
Yes,
the 5 points. You look at the 5 points, some of the biggest syndicate bosses came out of the 5 points. Capone, Lucky Luciano, and Torino. And so history of gangs, especially the Irish. The Irish immigrants were victimized in Ireland, but came over, and then what did they become? Pickpockets and stealing and trying to make their way. And it was mostly the majority of it was taking place in Manhattan, lower Manhattan. And because that's really kind of the center of everything it was, where people would meet and, they would victimize each other. And then it broke up into the Irish, the Italians, and the Eastmans with the Jewish. And the guy Eastman was literally in the 1890s was, he set the tone what was going to happen when crime. So, and you get to this movie and, the Warriors, and it's a matter of evolution that how they evolve, but it all goes back to the beginning part of New York City with the crime syndicates and stuff, and the gangs, street gangs. So
I think you could find this, and if you ever watch the movie Gangs of New York, which we'll have to do, since I'm finding that I have some historians on New York like yourself and John Sullivan, and but what's the Bowery Boys, Uglies, and all of these different the Butcher. What was that? The character played by I think he was part of the Bower Boys at the time. That's a kind of a nativist kind of thing, anti-Irish stuff going on, and so this struggle has been going on in New York. And I forget what movie I did. I think I did a movie about corruption. It might have been. I think I was doing a movie. It was Prince of the City. I think I did that movie, and I talked
Love that
about.
movie.
Yeah, I talked about the culture of New York. It's hard, because when you look at the cops in the movie, right, in that particular movie, and the corruption related to that movie, it's hard to understand if you are in an environment that has not tolerated corruption all those years like New York did. I mean, you become a product. Like I had a guest on my other show. My other show is Briefing with the Chief. You can find it on KJRA's Rumble channel tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. But I had a guy and he was talking about Chicago. I'm going to have him back on. And the corruption there, it's like when you grow up in a cesspool of corruption, it all looks normal.
Absolutely. It's funny you say that because my dad, he started on NYPD, got ran off. And I look at my uncle who came on New York, New Jersey Port Authority before he joined LAPD. Some of his friends he grew up with was on that special investigations unit.
Yeah.
Who either they killed themselves or they went to prison, and they put up with that. Look, I mean, and I listen, I have such pride about being from New York, and I know a lot of friends of mine. I have a nephew on NYPD, and I love the New York coppers, and some of them are great police officers. But guess what? They had some corruption in it, and they tolerated it. It was payoffs, and they would pay off who could get the certain beat and stuff, and that all that stuff, comes into play about not doing the job we should be doing and taking money. And the criminals loved when they got somebody who they could tap into and use for their leverage. And look at us. Look at when I say us. Look at LA County Sheriff's Department. Look what happened to us in 1988, 89.
Yeah.
With the Arco Narco and people you and I know, Pat, that unfortunately went to federal prison were compromised. Look at Miami. Look at Houston. It's across. So Pat, you and I talked about this. We recruit from the human race. We could do all the backgrounds we want on people, but guess what? We don't really know what they are until they're putting that into that position, and who could be compromised.
We got a comment. New York was a mirror of the rest of this country at the time, and I will say it was a mirror, but it was on steroids, meaning it was much more pronounced in New York. And I think
true.
I think when you talk about corruption, when we did the movie Prince of the City, they were going after the cops, but in reality, I think it was Robert Lucio is the name of the actual police officer, because it's based on a true story.
Yep.
In that special investigations unit who turned, it was the whole system was corrupt. People were corrupt. Judges were corrupt. And you can see a little bit now with what's going on with Trump. I mean, clearly there's corrupt persecution of Trump in New York and the rest of the country. And I'm not a huge Trump fan, but I can see with my own eyes that some of the stuff they're doing is just plain wrong. So there you go. Hey, Ralph, if you
I'm sorry, Pat, I lost you. What'd you say?
Yeah, if we just clarify, if we ever lose you, just go out
Pat?
and come back in.
Hey, Pat, I lost you.
Yeah, we lost you there. Okay,
hello?
Hold on a second.
Hello, we can hear you, Ralph. Can you hear us?
I can't hear Pat. I don't know why.
Oh,
all right,
Martine, I can't hear Pat.
Why don't you tell him to log out and come back in?
Yeah, but, I don't know. I can hear him fine.
Yeah, I can't hear him. Let him know I can't hear him.
Okay.
I don't know why.
He's hearing you. I would say, Ralph, if you get out of StreamYard and use the link to get in again, maybe that could solve the problem.
Okay, I'll leave and come back. Okay.
Okay.
All
Martine?
right.
So we'll talk about it. So anyway, but you've seen corruption also in your own native country, Martine. I don't know if it measures up to what we're talking about here in New York.
I have no idea.
Yeah, and one of the things I wanted to talk about, maybe when Ralph comes back, is the slow creep of the discussion of socialists that's the solution, but in In Venezuela, that move towards socialism just led to corruption, right? And when I looked at what was going on in New York, New York was very liberal at the time, and they had expansive benefits for everybody, and it bankrupted them, just like it bankrupted Venezuela, right?
The thing is this: the corruption predates the
Yeah.
socialism. In fact, the corruption was at that point that was one of the factors that made people think maybe if we try something different, the corruption will go away. It didn't.
Yeah.
It just got more blatant
Yeah.
and on steroids.
Just a different group of people stealing the money, right? That's
Yeah.
yeah. I one of the things I wanted to talk about, because I think it's a kind of a clarion call to what is going on today, and particularly in Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, these big blue cities, and particularly in the state of California, where we're just spending money without any results. That's what's coming back. Even Democrats are talking about that. Hey, we're spending billions of dollars, we're not getting results. We got this measure coming down, Prop 1, where it really, if you read it, it's really just an effort to plug some holes in the operational budget. They say, oh, it's for the veterans. Trust me, the governor doesn't care about veterans. He only cares about plugging holes in his operational budget. But what concerns me is what I read about New York at the time is they were on their knees and they were almost bankrupt. And what they had to do, which was very interesting, they had to transfer that one, they had to reach out to the state to help, but they had to transfer some of their tax funds to the state, and then the state took over that portion. But one of the interesting things is they compelled the employees' pension funds to buy city bonds because nobody would buy the bonds because they didn't trust that New York would last. So what New York did was they leveraged the pension funds to buy the bonds at lower rates and forced the employees to take the risk at lower amounts. Then they cut 40,000 employees, which when you look at what's going on in the Warriors, and before we got the broken windows theory and all that other stuff, when you look at what's going on in New York, I looked at pictures of the time. There's bandit cars on the streets. There's really a lack of services because when you cut 40,000 employees, the meter maids aren't there, the tow truck operators aren't there. There's less cops. And you see your city start to go in this death spiral. But what they had to do is they transferred all that debt into public employees unions, and they paid off their short-term debt. And after they paid off their short-term debt, they started doing investment. And this is why it's important to try and make sure you maintain good, healthy fiscal discipline, right? I'm a social moderate, but I'm a fiscal conservative. And the city of Detroit, my hometown, they went bankrupt, and my dad lost his medical benefits. So did my sister. The general employees who had taken a great more liberties with their pension fund than public safety, that's the police and fire. They took a 10 to 15% cut in their pensions, and some of them weren't making a lot of money. So, when the bankruptcy of a city will impact. So all these public employees that are, they're feeding off the trough, and I am clearly one of them, but I just don't. I'm realistic about it. We can't just keep giving money. We can't just keep spending money. It's one thing to spend money and get results. It's another thing to spend money and get no results. And ultimately, everybody has to pay attention to how the money's being spent and what we're getting out of it. As New York saw, as Ralph just said, everybody's in it for what they could get. And that drove New York to its knees. That's what was going on. And I think that's the clarion call that people need to think about is your municipality can fail. Public employees funds can be tapped to help solve those economic problems, and they're not untouchable. And everybody's got to start thinking, well, we can't kill the golden goose, right? We got to make sure it's healthy and keeps laying those eggs. I think New York figured that out before, but now they seem to be going in the other direction. Ralph, I'll give you, that's my comment on what I see going on in the movie and relating it today. What do you think?
Well, in the movie, I was looking at all the different scenes. Give you an example. I looked at the streets. I looked at the cars. Looked at the graffiti. And in one part near the end, when that big Cadillac, when the one guy, David Kelly, Patrick Kelly, who actually shot Cyrus, and they're pulling up. I look at the streets. I remember the streets looking like that. I remember all my dad eventually got a sanitation job, and I used to go out with him, and rats the size of cats. The streets were just, the gutters were littered with nothing but garbage, and nobody had any pride. And it was like you said again, and I said it. It was like I'm going to take all I could get, as much as I could grab, And truly, it brought the city down to its knees between the corruption, crime, the ugliness. I mean, I remember my father-in-law worked in the South Bronx, the Bronx Iron Metal Corporation, and across from his plants on Hunts Point Avenue was nothing but prostitutes. He even made the movie, the Fort Apache of the Bronx with Paul Newman and Pam Grier. It truly was ugly. And I saw one of the comments of one of your guests talked about the 90s until Giuliani and Bill Bratton came around with broken windows theory. And I truly believe that. I truly believe that you address the small issues, it affects the big issues. You arrest the people for the lower crimes, you will affect the bigger crimes and connect to the higher level criminals. And I'll tell you right now, I'm really concerned about our country and the big cities of this country, because working in other countries, and I saw the poverties in Central America and Mexico, I got to tell you something. When I see boats landing in San Diego and on Huntington Beach or up in Malibu, we're further up north, what are we becoming? And you said something that really resonated to me, Pat, and I think Martine said it too. We just can't throw monies towards a problem. You can't throw monies towards it. You really have to have true solutions, just like we did, Pat. When we worked certain crime areas, we addressed the issues in our RD reporting districts. Okay, we try to impact, we try to build bridges with the community to solve those crimes and connect with the good people. As my father always told me, my uncle always told me, get to know the good people before you get to know the bad people. And the reason why is this. That's more of an army you have out there for information. To be a good cop, you have to have information. And so, we have politicians that don't care really about solving the problems. All they care about, Pat, and you and I believe you believe what I'm going to say here, Pat, is that they care about their own power base than truly solving a problem. Look at Portland with the fentanyl problems. Look at LA, look at New York City, Philadelphia. I mean, we could solve this. There's laws on the books. We don't need any more new laws. We have the laws available to the police officers to do the job and take people to jail, but the prosecutors have to prosecute, and the judges have to impose the penalties. So, we're really in a quagmire right now, because I apologize, Pat, to go on, but I just want to get this point out, is that it's not, you don't have to be that intelligent. It's common sense. It's really common sense solving problems. But you know something? These politicians want to complicate it. They want to make the average Joe feel stupid, that they have all the answers, and they don't.
No. Well, first of all, I want to thank for the comments, Cam. Yes, your comments about New York and Baltimore are right on. I think I saw follow the Roman Empire one there. Yes, I agree with you. I don't think we quite gone as bad as it was, but the point of this discussion is what you see in the movie on the Warriors is actually realistic, and it did happen, and we could be going back in that direction unless we pull back and reassess the policies that are driven. As I said off screen before we came on, ideology does not make for good public policy. And right now we're driven more by socialistic ideologies than we are good governance. And I always like good governance. I mean, hey, if welfare works and solves problems, that's great. But if they don't, then you got to go in a different direction. And right now, what I don't see that we're going in a positive direction, particularly in California, because we're spending a lot of money and we're not getting results, which is what New York was doing. Everybody was just had their hand out, but they weren't looking for the final result. And it's a great discussion, Ralph. I did want to hit you up on that. We brought Martine in a little bit about Venezuela, which used to be one of the wealthiest countries in South America, and now it's on its knees for much of the same reasons: corruption, what's in it for me, and elites at the top taking an advantage and stealing the money from everybody else, right, Martine?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Pat, can I just make a comment about the movie, which I thought was very significant. When Cyrus was at Cortlandt Park and speaking to all the thousands of gangs from throughout the Manhattan, Brooklyn, Bronx, the only one that wasn't represented was Staten Island. Okay, but anyway, the Mexican Mafia did that in 1993. And the Mexican Mafia from Bakersfield to San Diego, all the capos met with the soldados, the street gangs, the local street gangs, and told them this is the rules, the reglas, the rules and regulations that you're going to have to follow. So Cyrus at the time was trying to organize all the gangs. Why? To organize the benefit of bringing stealing, how to organize the whole syndicate to bring monies in to share that. Okay, well, guess what? The Mexican Mafia accomplished that in 1993, and they're still doing it.
Well, all right. I have to talk about one of the outcomes of that particular meeting, Ralph, and you need to explain it. And just to a shout out to Cyrus, can you dig it?
Yeah,
he said in the movie.
The guy was a showman.
Can you dig it? Yeah. So walk-ups versus drive-bys. Explain one of the things that came out of that, the effort to reduce the violence in dealing drugs was to stop the innocent people from being killed, and so they stopped drive-bys and did walk-ups. You want to explain that, Ralph?
Well, you're talking about during the 80s and 90s, and actually the 90s. Actually, there was so many drive-bys going around in LA, and that the Mexican Mafia, even the black gang, started realizing, that the police weren't going to put up with that. The politicians weren't going to put up with that. So working gangs, guess what? We accelerated doing gang association warrants, where we connected all the dots of 10, 15, 20 gang members to a certain gang, and why to get into the homes, get intel, get evidence for crimes and stuff like that. So the Mexican Mafia and the black gang leaders realized it. So guess what? They ordered kind of a more close encounters where they did walk-ups, just like the Italians did back in the day. That's why, in New York City, they had a difficult time until they got the RICO Act. When they killed somebody, it was a real close encounter. It wasn't just a spraying bullets around and stuff. And so that was the reason why they transitioned to that.
Yeah.
Plus, I don't mean to interrupt you. I apologize, Pat.
Go ahead.
But plus the fact that, there was penalties put out by the Mexican Mafia that if you did a drive-by and innocent people, guess what? You may be killed because of what you did. And that had a significant impact in lowering the drive-by shootings. Go ahead, Pat. I'm sorry.
If you watch the old gangster movies in New York and Chicago from the 30s and 40s, they did the pray and spray, right? They just opened up they did drive-bys back then, and that's what we're talking about. These guys would do drive-bys on rival locations, and they would just pray and spray and shoot wherever and innocent people were getting killed, and so that's why they transitioned to the walk-up. So it's interesting as we talk about Cyrus. Can you dig it? So that they're trying to make rules to just like they did with in the mafia days, in Prohibition, to bring less heat from law enforcement on them. Hey, everybody likes their vice, their dope, their alcohol, whatever. But when you start killing a lot of people and innocent people getting killed, then everybody wants to do something about it. When you make the front pages and you're on the news all the time, you make an attractive target for some sergeant, lieutenant, or detective that wants to make a name for themselves and put you in jail, right? The FBI comes down on you, the G-men come down on you. Well, so that was a good discussion on New York and what was going on in New York at the time. And I sadly, potentially things that, I think what is going on in Baltimore right now, I think Baltimore is there, but other areas of the country are heading in this direction if we don't change course. And I think the Warriors, the movie The Warriors, can show you where we could end up if we don't pay attention and change direction. But in this movie, we had some really, most of the actors were really not named actors at the time, right? They're just character actors. I think they used some stunt schools for a lot of the character actors or the rival gang members. I do think some of the the Baseball Fury. Some of those folks, they put the makeup on just because they wanted to use those guys in multiple scenes, I think. So,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Oh, let's dress these guys up so they look a little different. So they, nobody realizes that they're the same gangsters, just a different dress. But we had Michael Beck in this as Swan. We had James Remar, who went on to have a good character actor career for what 30 or 40 years. And we had David Harris as Cochise, Marcelo Sanchez as Rembrandt, Dorsey Wright as Cleon. That was the original guy that was the leader that got killed, right? Terry Mickles as Vermin. I don't think I'd want that name, but whatever. But David Patrick Kelly, and we'll see him towards the end. He's the leader of the rival gang, the Rogues, and I think he has the iconic scene, which we'll talk about towards the end. But he's a character actor that had a long and illustrious career as a character actor. He's off from the city of Detroit, so in my hometown, and then we had the voice. Lynn Thigpen. Let's throw up her picture there because you don't ever see her other than her lips in the movie. And we have a picture of Lynn, and I think she played in the movie Stand By Me. Let's throw that up there, Martine. Okay. And
wait.
Here we go.
Give me a second. We have this one.
Yep.
There she is. Yep. And that's the movie Stand By Me. And I remembered, when I was listening to the voice, I go, God, I know that actress. And then I actually saw a picture of her. Okay, that's who it is. And this is probably one of her earlier gigs. But the interesting thing about this was I was watching John Wick 4. And they used an actress, and they did pretty much the same thing, where she was the voice over the radio to the gangs to find John Wick. Very much similar to this case, where she's the voice to the gangs, giving them a heads up where the warriors are at in the city. And so it was a good throwback in John Wick. And then we see that a lot in our movies, right? They'll take a scene that was kind of popular or something that was part of another popular movie. And this has become a cult classic. They invested $4 million. It made 22 at the time, but it's still making money because so many people continue watching it. There's a video game for it, right? And so I just want to show her because she's dead now. She died. I think she died of cancer in the early 2000s. Yes. But Ralph, you were telling me before we went on the air that this was something that is consistent in the hip hop culture as well, right?
Yeah, it's really interesting is that when I heard that, I kind of had a funny feeling who she was by her voice. Let's face it. I mean, Narco Corridos, have songs. We were talking, Martin and I and you were talking about this before we went on the air, that they use music to get messages out, messages that maybe before somebody gets killed, a subliminal message. The rappers do it. Music was used, and here they use it. Get a message out during this movie to go after the warriors, and then whoever gets them is going to be rewarded, by the riffs. And I think it was very interesting, very timely. I think they used that, and I think it was a very interesting part of the movie to demonstrate how they use music as a disc jockey putting a message out. And then I think it really truly was. I remember seeing this movie years ago, and when I saw it again yesterday, it kind of brought back a lot of certain feelings of me growing up in New York again, Pat. I circle back to, and hey, listen, music has always been a message. Whatever it is, a message of good feelings or bad feelings or jealousies or envy or violence.
Well, we can, Martine, go ahead and roll the first. I think I got New York gangs, or Gangs of New York. The New Gangs of New York is what I entitled it. But as the opening scene rolls out, they show that they're in Coney Island, but you see the different cliques or gangs coming up, right? And which I thought was pretty interesting. So I wanted to show this, as you'll see them flip through. But they did have street gangs like this. This was the thing as I did my research on it. Like I'm from Detroit. I remember growing up, there was one gang that always seemed to be in the newspapers, and they called them the Flynns, the Errol Flynns, sometimes the Nasty Flynns, after the actor. I don't know why, but that's what they did. And they had other gangs in Detroit, but that they seemed to be the most violent. They were hitting near Cobo Hall. If you went downtown to see an event, you were getting robbed mostly by these guys. But in New York, they had a lot of these gangs as well. They had the Savage Skulls, they had the Savage Nomads, they had the Javelins, the Reapers. I mean, these different groups that were. And the interesting thing about it is they did in fact have their names on jackets and with a rocker underneath for whatever. That was true to me. I thought this was just theater, right? It wasn't real life, but in reality, in New York, they did have some of these kinds of things where people had colors, they wore their names, they were proud of their affiliations, they dressed the same. That was very much like the Errol Flynn's in Detroit, but I mean, I doubt that they were wearing top hats like this and face mist. I think they did some of that just so they can use some of the extras over and over in different groups and different gangs. But there was a uniform or colors that a lot of these guys wore. Did you see that growing up, Ralph?
Yeah, I did see it. And during the mid '70s, me and my cousin Matt and Jimmy Messina and Bob Zapata, we would go to Coney Island, and as a group of guys, had a few beers and stuff, and you would see some of these people with these colors, and we kind of kept to ourselves, but we did get a couple of tassels with some of these people, and you had to be careful. You had to be careful because here we were, we didn't. We were kind of guys that we thought, hey, we're going to go, straight up with you. We're not going to have any knives. I didn't see guns, at my time, but, we did get a couple of tassels with some of these people. And luckily, I was with a group of guys and myself. We could handle ourselves. But also, we knew how to skate. We had a car. My cousin Matt was the oldest. We had a car, and we got the hell out of there. And we went to a different area. But Coney Island was a center place where along the water they would meet and have a pretty good Donnybrooks, and stuff. And but what I saw though was mostly hand to hand.
Yeah.
I didn't see guys carrying the chains. I'm not saying no people didn't have switchblades. That was always a famous thing in New York with a switchblade and stuff. But I feel like I look back on it, I was pretty damn lucky, that got out of there. But Coney Island was a focal point, and where different gangs would meet because why? The young ladies would be there too, and it's where you meet.
Yeah.
You meet the ladies, and guys would be the jealousies and the machismo and the egos and stuff. And so one word led to another thing, another word, and another word led to a more of a physical confrontation,
Well, I just more of the names here that I'm finding is the Assassins, the Jolly Stompers, the Brooklyn from Brooklyn, and then the Saigons from Harlem, just different, all these different names that I would have. But yeah, it's it's the biggest city in the country. Of course, they have all these different names, and the interesting thing about Coney Island. So our gang, the Warriors, is actually from Coney Island, and they have to go to a meeting. I think it was in Brooklyn is where they went.
No, it was in the Bronx where they all met Cyrus. It's Cortlandt Park.
And so they were going there to meet with all the other gangs to, I guess, have a gang truce. But the interesting thing about Coney Island was I worked at Universal City. I don't know if you're aware of that, Ralph. So I was a two-striper, and we had a small substation up there. Yep. Just six deputies at the time, and then me as a two-striper. And they opened up City Walk, which was this urban playground kind of thing with theaters and restaurants and shops. And the gangs started coming up there. And we were having gang fights, and it was becoming a problem because parents would just drop their kids off up there, regular kids, and then you had these gangsters coming up because that's where the beautiful girls were at, right? They'd all kind of hang out and oogle the girls. And our way of solving that problem was I told my guys, hey, for the next month, I want you to do nothing but field interview cards. I want to see what's going on. Who's coming up here, right? And we saw that it was a lot of gangs, but it was like youngsters with some adults. So it was kind of young adults, and then people are under 18. And I figured, you know what, let's enforce truancy up here. And so at 10 o'clock, I would have a skirmish line of deputies. I started this up there, and we would go through, because if you're loitering without purpose, you can kick them out, right? So either you're going to the movies, you're going to get something to eat, but you ain't going to stand around. And so we just started kicking them out. And I'm curious, why did they do this in Coney Island? Because we did that, and it's funny. I went back 6 years later as lieutenants, and they were still doing it, but somebody else claimed the idea, right? But I started doing that every night, and our problems dropped because even if they were 18, 19, 20, and they could stay up there, they were hanging out with youngsters, right? So most of my problem went away, and it ended up becoming the gangsters actually liked it because it became a place where they could take a date and not get shot or not have to get in a fight, because we got rid of all the youngsters who were being stupid, right? And so it kind of became a what do they call it? A zone where you don't have
a safe zone.
Yeah, a safe zone. It kind of became a safe zone. Our crime dropped, and they did some other. Instead of having places where people could sit down on walls, they kind of made it bumpy so they couldn't do that. So there were a lot of other things that we worked on, but that was the big thing that really dropped it down. And I'm surprised they didn't do that in New York. Maybe they tried. Go ahead.
So you bring up a good point, Pat. And back in the 70s when I was a teenager, you remember they were basically, police were vacating New York City, leaving because of the budget. The other thing was this. Even during that time, the liberal city it was, they really weren't having the officers being proactive. I mean, so you got to understand something, Pat. And again, in New York City compared to LA County Sheriff's Department, what I love about LA County Sheriff's Department, we were always proactive. We looked for things that we noticed. We gained street smarts, where we need to go to intervene to maybe mitigate a crime, right? Well, I got to tell you something. New York City didn't do that. They didn't do that. And I could tell you this, when my radio car partner and I took him to New York City in 1986. And I went on, my friend was a captain of Fort Apache, the Bronx, 45th Precinct. And we went around. We'd have cops staying on a corner, and then right next to them, the people dealing drugs. I go, aren't you going to do something? And they go, no, we're there to prevent the violent crime. But the point is this. Arresting this guy for drugs could lead to that guy who was a gang member who committed these violent crimes. So my point is, they didn't do that. Even in the mid 70s, when I was a teenager, they didn't do that. And we were used to LA County sheriffs being proactive and looking for the things that cause crime. There's certain we learned about what a gang was, a definition of a gang, and we go seek those things out. But guess what? New York City didn't do that. The mentality was stand by, be visible. The visibility will curtail crime, but that doesn't happen though. I mean, look at now. We're getting cops beat up in New York City. It's disgusting. It's disgusting. But getting back to Universal City, Pat, you're right. You guys did a good job there. And also, I remember there was a murder there when I was a gang sergeant. We worked there. We brought teams there, and we spoke to the captain of West Hollywood Station to get more FIRs, field interview reports completed. And then when I was a gang lieutenant, we would bring investigators there, engaging with our green jackets and Levi's, engaging some of these gang members we see. And guess what? By engaging it in a very relaxed manner, we actually mitigated violent crime, along with you and your team there.
Yeah, what I figured is, we kick the youngsters out who are trying to make a name for themselves and are stupid. The older gangsters are gonna try, and because they want a place to take their girl, they're not going to get shot, right? That was one thing. I will say, go ahead and roll the next clip there, Martine Alliance. But I used to hire the mounted guys.
Yes,
I'd bring those guys up because everybody saw the horse. Cops and radio cars sometimes blend into the urban landscape, but everybody sees that big cop. Dave Disbro. Oh my God, he was huge. He had this huge Clydesdale type horse. Everybody saw that guy. But here on the alliances, they're coming together to bring the gangs together to reduce the violence and to get, as you said, Ralph, to figure out how they can get more for themselves. They're all in it for themselves, including Cyrus. I'm sure who got the largest share of this. But he does point out that there are a lot more gangsters and gangster-affiliated folks than cops. At the time, they cut 40,000 employees, and a big chunk of that, usually your biggest departments in city government, is police. So they're the big chunk of that's going to get cut. And when those things happen, as we saw with the defund the police movement recently, you're going to see an increase in crime. And they just realized, hey, we have the upper hand if we just play our cards right. Can you dig it, Cyrus? If we play our cards right, we can be in charge. And here he is here. And what do you think, Martin? What do you think of this scene, Mr. Martin?
Yeah, it's a curious thing because although I cannot relate to any character in the movie or their motivations, you cannot see that he was up to something. He was, yeah, he was making a very good point, and you at the end of the movie, you think, well, maybe the bad guy amongst the bad guys in the movie made everybody a favor by killing this guy.
Well, what I saw in the scene is whether it's La Cosa Nostra coming together to make the commission, or it's the Mexican mafia trying to stamp down the street gangs and get a stream of income for themselves. Um, those things do happen, but there's always somebody who doesn't go. Whether it's Dutch Schultz, I mean, it was Dutch Schultz back in the day who didn't want to go along with the commission, and they ended up killing Dutch Schultz. So they have these renegades, and we certainly see that in here. He's trying to bring them all together, and he's ultimately killed by somebody who just doesn't want to play the game, right? So Ralph, we talked a little bit about this. Gang truces, not really a gang truce to stop the criminal activity. It's really more about suppressing the worst aspects of gang violence. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, the truce is in this truce here was once again a highlighting Cyrus. Cyrus wants to be the leader. Cyrus wants to put his arms around everybody and say we all will benefit financially by committing certain crimes, and you can run your own districts. But guess what? You got to feed me percentage. Probably that's what eventually was going to happen. But was it David Kelly Patrick? Patrick Kelly. He had some other ideas for himself by taking that guy out. But I go back to just like we have MS-13, right? MS-13 came up with the 503 program, program or reglas and rules and regulations, and they were trying to think of breaking away from the Mexican mafia, but the Mexican mafia was much more powerful than them. But guess what? MS-13 is all over the United States, and so they have their own little factions. But on the West Coast, the Mexican mafia still controls a lot of those people, and it's always going to be ego, machismo, and they're always going to take out somebody who's like they took out Cyrus. They took out other gang members. Al Capone, who eventually died in prison, but there's always look at John Gotti. Took out Paul Castellano and stuff, and I mean. There's guys that we used in our investigation, Operation Knockout, that would have been eventually killed, and they stepped away from the Mexican mafia. Well, I'm not going to mention his name, but I think he's out in the streets now. But it's always that jealousy. That's what came to that meeting. They a lot of the majority liked what Cyrus was saying, but there's jealousies within because somebody wants to be in power.
Yeah.
And and guess what? If you live by the sword, you die by the sword. I remember doing a town hall meeting with a lot of Latinos in Men's Central Jail, and I always told them, I said, every one of you, you live by the sword, you're going to die by the sword, and there's nothing beneficial of being in a gang. I used to tell them, you got a dental program, a health program, or something like that. If you do, maybe I'll join the gang, But they don't have shit. Excuse the expression.
No, they don't. And so let's bring people up to speed. So he's trying to bring these guys together. Can you dig it? That's all these 70s terms, which are a throwback to that time. I did the movie The Choir Boys and Cut Off Shorts. We commented on the Cut Off Shorts in the movie Choir Boys. That's that great Joseph Wambaugh book. Anyway, so they try to bring them together, and one of the characters shoots Cyrus, who's trying to bring the peace so they can get more for themselves. And he then blames the warriors. The leader of the warriors, I think Cleon, is killed. because they believe he did it. You know, the Riffs, who are the powerful gang in the city. And the interesting thing about this is, based upon my research, that did in fact a group of gangsters. I can't remember which one it was. It was a black gang. Tried to bring everybody together and to bring a peace. Probably, in my opinion, likely so that they can be more efficient at stealing and making money. And he was shot. He wasn't killed in real life, but it draws some similarities to what was actually going on in New York at the time. You had all these different boroughs, and these boroughs had multiple sets that were active. They tended to claim certain blocks, as you saw in the movie when with the orphans trying to carve out their own little piece, and everybody had to show respect and pay tribute, I guess, to go through. That, of course, existed to some degree in LA. You didn't roam into other territories. So this was going on, and there were efforts to try and unite these folks so that they can make money, at least on a limited scale. And it it didn't go well for them at the time. It didn't go well in the movie. Now, this is what, as the Warriors are running, here's what I liked about it. And you started hearing the movies because you got the theme song, the Warriors, but Nowhere to Run is played right away. Nowhere to Run, Nowhere to Hide. Perfect, obviously the perfect song.
Yeah.
And you have all these different so the soundtrack was actually pretty good too. It was engaging. What'd you think, Martin? What'd you think of the soundtrack and what they used in the movie?
Well, I am a model 73, so I I like that movie. I like that song, the funk, the disco. And I really I dug that that soundtrack.
Yeah, it was, I think the music just made help really progress the movie along. The music progressed the movie along, and that's what I liked about it. And it keeps you engaged. You got In the City with Joe Walsh was one of the songs, and of course the great Nowhere to Run, Nowhere to Hide with Arnold McCullers, and it's just good music, and just kept you engaged, and it kept the tempo of the movie moving forward, because there was no resting. You went from one scene to another, and you had to deal with one gang after another. Which let's bring up the voice. I know I showed her picture. We could show her picture again, and and so this is where the DJ came in, because the DJ would play the music, and then there's the picture of the voice. She's, here we are. There are all you boppers out there in the city, and all you street people with an ear for the action. So she's speaking to them, and I thought this was kind of so interesting when I first saw this movie in the '80s, and I don't think I saw it at the movie theater. I think I saw it several years later. I mean, maybe it might have been a reprise, because I remember seeing it at the theater, and there was some fight outside the theater after I was leaving it. So, oh God, keep this stuff in the show. But I thought this was very interesting how they used her in this film. I thought it was really cool that they did it in John Wick 4. I like when they take something that occurred in one movie and they use it in another movie as kind of a ode to, or a throwback to, or a nod to a previous movie. What'd you think, Ralph?
No, I think I commented before. I liked it. I liked it a lot. I liked the way they inserted that. You mentioned the songs. It kept us the music kept the flow of the movie. It kept you interested in the movie, um, and for the time, it brought me back to when I was, 22 years old. When I first left New York. And it was a good reminder of me about, my certain things I love about New York, and I'm not talking about crime, but there's certain things I love about New York, though, that I'll always love New York until the day I leave this earth. But they did a great job with that. They did a great job of, using Miss Thigpen. Is that the name again? I forget.
Yes.
Is that her name?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I love. She had a great voice. To use that as a diss jockey, the messaging, I thought that was really, really creative in a way for the director to do that.
Well, you also, as this scene scrolls, you see the different people. So you got skinheads. It's interesting because you got skinheads, and it's kind of a multicultural kind of group of skinheads, and where we would
Yes.
think of them where they'd be primarily white, nowadays. But it's New York, so it's a little different. And the one I thought was kind of interesting is they saw the guys with the Hawaiian shirt kind of look. Probably doesn't work that well in winter, but I mean, this is based in the summertime, right? So
Right.
right, but they're running and they're trying to get back to Coney Island. So okay, so it takes them a long time, Ralph, seem to get back to Coney Island. So tell me, tell all of us ignorant non-New Yorkers, you're in was it the Bronx? That's where the meeting happened with Cyrus, right?
Yep.
What is without any barriers, what's the time it takes for you to get from the Bronx to Coney Island without any problems?
You could get there within 30 minutes, with the subway, the railroad, the L, and I mean, but the thing is, it's a movie. It's a movie, and plus during the time they were out there, it was no traffic. It was at nighttime, but it wouldn't do the movie any good to rush it because there was a storyline about it. How they're gonna, be pointed as the gang that killed Cyrus, the Godfather, and how they're going to make their journey back. And the journey was interesting. And I got to tell you something else. You brought up, kind of made me think. It wasn't amazing how they made the cops look like idiots, though. I mean, it bothered the hell out of me. But yet, it's part of the movie. The one cop running down the subway, and then he throws a baton, hits him in the leg, and the guy's holding his leg, and then, and then the other, I think it was. James Raymar, I think it was him or maybe somebody else getting in a fight on the platform, and I think the cop fell into
one of the
Warriors did. One of the Warriors fell in.
Tossed in there.
Yeah. But it's interesting they made the police look like kind of fools, but it did get James Raymar handcuffed by the lady on the park bench. He was interested in, making a relationship with this lady, and she fooled him when she put the handcuffs on him, and they arrested him, and it showed his foolishness and his poor decision-making as not why nobody supported him as a leader.
Well, that's why they usually end up in jail, the poor decision-making. The dumb ones we catch a lot, and you see that. Let's roll that scene. How far to Coney Island? And so let's talk about the transit system, because the transit system is a big part of the movie here. It takes 30 minutes, and they find ways. First, they have to get to the elevated train platform. Then they got to hide out from the skinheads here who are chasing them down. And of course, it is a movie because you see them in this bus, and they can't seem to catch these guys who are just running. so they got it's good cinematic stuff you're going on there. So let's just say the music and the DJ provides a thorough line to keep the narrative moving and the cohesive, in my opinion. Hey, thank you, Cam. Yes, we are, at least Ralph and I are not Hollywood specialists, so I appreciate the comment there. But it's so you have to get to a platform, and sometimes they can be a little farther apart. And you have to get to the right platform to get to Coney Island. And here they're waiting outside of the platform because, as correctly, they don't want to be on the platform because you can be cornered on the platform, right? So they're waiting until the train comes, and at night, just for the folks who are not transit riders, at night the trains are spaced out more because you don't have as much
population going. Yeah,
that's right. You're not moving as many, so your headways. I'm going to use the transit term. Your headways are going to be, instead of every 10 minutes or 15 minutes of train rides, it might be every 30 minutes. Maybe 20 minutes or 30 minutes, right? So you have to wait longer to catch the train to get out of town, right? And you see that here. They out raced the skinheads. They had a really slow bus, so they were able to.
they had a clutch problem,
Yeah, I think so. So they were out to. But heck, so we got the graffiti on the trains. Now, this would have been death when I was the transit chief of police. We would have had this all cleaned up. We'd have gone after these graffiti artists. You know that we had a very proactive anti-graffiti program.
Right.
There as the chief. It got national recognition. But that was part of the broken windows theory. Clean everything up and then hold these people accountable that are doing it. So as the way I say it with the broken windows theory is just sweat the small stuff and that'll take care of the big stuff, right? Right. In a marriage, you don't sweat the small stuff. Right. But when it comes to crime, you do sweat the small stuff, right? And takes care of itself, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
tell us, is this realistic? What you seeing on the train? Was this a little bit of Hollywood? A lot of the graffiti? Do they have a lot of graffiti like that, or was it?
Oh no, it was reality. I mean, I guarantee you, not like when they did the colors at Carson Station, where in the interview rooms we actually brought in gang members to do the interview rooms at Carson Station, do all the graffiti on the walls, and then but that in '70s was every train had major graffiti. They didn't have to go bring any artist in to create that. That was reality back then. I mean, it was all over the place. It was very discouraging, to see all that, the dirt. And like I said from the beginning, in the '70s, how dirty the city was. And the trains and inside the trains and outside the trains actually had that.
I was watching a podcast, and it was the Manhattan Institute. I don't know if you ever get a chance to listen to those folks, and but they are supportive of the broken windows theory. They do the research to support community-oriented policing, broken windows theory. They push back against this negative narrative, and they had this guy on, and they do the I think it's the John Q. Wilson Award. So they really believe it. This is Heather McDonald is part of the institute, and they wrote another book. What's that?
My uncle bought me this book when I was a sergeant. It's called Community Policing: How to Get Started, and by Robert Tranowitz. He died. Michigan State professor. I gotta tell you, that man. I'll be honest with you, was phenomenal. He died of a heart attack, but I read both of his books, and I implemented all those programs he created and used them at Bellflower and Cerritos. Yeah. And it did have impact, though. I'll tell you right now, it really did. And you're 100% right. What you did with the trains, I know other people in the sheriff's department, NYPD, around the country about community policing and problem solving using the SARA model, scanning, analysis, response, and assessment. I got to tell you, Pat, that stuff works. And unfortunately, the politicians got away from it because they think we're focusing on violating Blacks and Latinos' civil rights, but we're helping those communities.
No, I think they knew exactly what was going on. I think they're just looking for a way to, that represents power to them by pointing out the disparities from a policy. The bottom line is Black people were committing more crime. That's why more of them ended up in jail. That's just the way it is. And the benefit is if you read Heather McDonald's book, War on Cops.
War on Cops. Yep.
There's another one called, I can't remember the name of the author, but it's Criminal Injustice, and he's it's almost like if I have to say, it's volume 2 of War on Cops is basically the book, and they talk about it, and they just say, hey, here the equity. Where's the equity of these? Well, the equity is that you reduce crime and investment rolled in, and people got jobs, and hope came. And people were able to go to college. Kids who didn't have those opportunities when you reduce crime. And like I remember I was in Century Station when I got there I think I got there in '98 as a sergeant, and they didn't have a Starbucks in the area. But crime was going down, and the Starbucks moved in before I left. And so I was very happy. I could get my coffee fix. But it was a Starbucks desert when I first got there, right? And we're going in that direction now, where we're going backwards, where businesses are closing because of crime. And I think we are at the halfway mark. Are we ready for our commercial? Okay, take it away.
Yes, we are.
Meet the Seattle Vigilante. Like so many comic heroes, this warrior hides his identity. But his identity isn't the only secret he has to keep. After grievous wounds received during combat, Tier 1 operator John Russell begins to recover and comes to terms with his new reality of being an amputee. And as he learns how to use his new prosthetic limb, he finds himself caught up in the bureaucratic red tape that too many wounded veterans experience, the exhausting medboard process. Out of sheer frustration, John takes it out on the criminal scum of the city. But when reality kicks in, John realizes he started something that's having an impact on the greater world around him, and thus has to reevaluate his motives. And moreover, just how far is John willing to go to finish this war he's declared against the criminals in Seattle? And will he even survive? From the creator of IDW's award-winning graphic novel Code Word Geronimo comes a new story about a different kind of warrior, Vindicated Inc., the first of its kind disabled veteran action hero comic. The Vindicated Ink graphic novel crowdfunding campaign on fundmycomic.com is provided in the description of this video. We hope you become a contributor. Please share this link. Thank you.
Welcome back to Morning Coffee with the Chief on Pop Culture Minefield. You can find us on YouTube and Rumble at 8 a.m. on Tuesdays, Pacific Standard Time. And we go over crime-related movies or cop-related movies with retired law enforcement and some other special guests like today with Martine. And we talk about what's going on in the movie, our careers, and what is going on today. Now, I just to finish up that thought, Ralph, and then we'll get on to the next scene, is in a week from tomorrow on my show, Briefing with the Chief, which is on KGRA Rumble on Wednesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm going to do a defense of Broken Window Theory with Todd Rogers. Todd implemented on a wide scale on the Sheriff's Department, the largest in the country. He met John Q. Wilson and his partner. I can't remember his partner's name. Kelling, I think, is the name of it. And so I've been
Keeling.
I've been wanting to do this subject. I'm really looking forward to it. I got to do my research to get ready for Todd. He can probably just click this stuff off the top of his head like you. But it's important that we break that negative narrative, that lie, that disparaging lie, because it's in reality all the politicians pushed us to do it, and then they all changed their mind about it and said it's all the cops that are bad. Yet the politicians, policymakers, and everybody else are the ones pushing us to do this stuff based upon science, I might add. Well, let's get into the next scene, and I think I got it listed as the Yankees. And the reason why I felt the Baseball Fury was some of the most interesting gang in here, because they got the pinstripes for the New York Yankees, and they got their faces colored, and they're running around with baseball bats, and they're running from these guys because they got baseball bats, and they don't seem to be able to shake these guys, and they do end up fighting them. And one of our main characters says, "I'm going to take that baseball bat and shove it up your tail and make you look like a popsicle." So they do end up fighting these guys. But I just thought it was the costumes. It made it a lot more interesting. But this is kind of it's kind of a caricature of what was going on in New York at the time, because I doubt everybody had face paint on when there were gangs, right? I don't know if there was a gang that identified with the Yankees, but it just made it a lot more, I don't know, made it interesting. And what's the next outrageous thing you're going to see in the movie, right? And you do see it. You see the punks, some guys on roller skates. I can't imagine a punk or gangster on roller skates, but you see that later in the movie too, right? But here's the train cars, and they end up running from the Baseball Furies. They're trying to get away from the Baseball Furies. What do you think? They end up having to split up and then come back together, and they're going to eventually meet at Union Station. But Baseball Furies, interesting. Here's one of the characters right here, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of him?
Yeah, Pat, it's part of movie and theatrics, and I think they would just the director just throwing it out there, kind of just show a different gang and kind of just a theatrical drama way, if you want. I've never seen that. I've never seen it, any in my time, living in New York. But I mean, the guys would either be in jeans, a vest, or some colors, but not to that level. But it made it fun. It made it interesting. And I thought the Warriors did a good job when they went running through the park. They split up and then backtracked them, and came in behind them and took one of them out, got the bat, and got the next guy the bat, and then before you know it, you got bats on bats, and the Warriors survived.
Well, I would keep going. I don't think I'd want to turn around and face 4 or 5 guys with bats. And it's interesting because it's clearly theatrics, because they're all waiting for their turn to fight. These guys are not all going after them at once for the most part, and because they do have them outnumbered and they're armed with baseball bats. Martine, is this one of the things that made the movie interesting for you? They had these different kinds of groups and how they were dressed?
Well, yes and no. I remember at the beginning of the movie, they say it's in the future. So the movie is not set in the 79. It cannot be much more ahead in the future, because the whole ambience of the city and the production will betray you. But I think they use that line as an excuse to, well, we can push the look and feel of these gangs a little more, saying that okay, the gangs do not look like that right now, but if things continue the way they are, they might well look like this.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think this is also when you look at the movie Snake Plissken, Escape from New York,
Mm.
Escape from L.A. I think they take some inspiration from the Warriors as well.
Hmm.
What do you think? I mean, he's trying to get out of New York and different kinds of groups and they all kind of dress and act a little differently. But I thought that was pretty interesting. And okay, so Ralph, I got to ask a question. So I'm
Go
going from
ahead.
the Bronx. Union Station. So do I have to go to Union Station first to be able to hit Coney Island? Explain. I mean,
Yeah,
they were on a train. They were hoping to get out of there, and then they stopped the train by a fire, right? So they had to find another way. So explain the Bronx Coney Island. I'm Bronx to Union Station. What is that?
you take the subway from the Bronx to Union Station, get off, and then get on another subway to get to get to Brooklyn. And they selected Union Station as a focal point, a meeting point, because it's large and most of the times a lot of people in Union Station, even during late night hours. But it's not that far, from each one. It's a midpoint to go from the Bronx to Union Station to Brooklyn.
And you can theoretically make it there on foot if you had to. It's just tougher to do
You mean
when you're going when you're gang.
walking from the Bronx?
Can you? Can you walk from the Bronx
I mean, I ran the New York City Marathon 3 times. From all the way from Staten Island all the way up to the Bronx, to the Harlem, and then back to Central Park. It's going to take you. It's going to take you a while. I remember walking from Midtown into Brooklyn. It took probably about an hour or so.
Yeah.
And I mean, but it was an enjoyable walk. But I didn't have people chasing me though.
No, no. I was the last time I was in New York. I was in Midtown Manhattan, and I'd been in meetings all day, and they let us out a little early, and I just said, I'm just gonna go south, and I just started walking south, and it was probably about an hour into my walk, and I go, okay, this is changing a little bit, so I got an Uber and got back to my hotel. I think I was staying in Brooklyn at the time. But another time I went there, I got there. I was staying in Brooklyn as well. This was the first night I got there, and I wanted to go eat at Sir Francis Tavern. Is that the name of that? It's a place where George Washington saluted his officers in 17, I think 83 or 89. I can't remember the year, but it still exists. It's a pub, a restaurant, and he brought all of his officers there, and he had dinner with them and saluted them and thanked them for their service after the Revolutionary War. And it's still there. And I found out about that as soon as I landed and got to my hotel. Like I said, I was staying in Brooklyn. I took an Uber to go there to have dinner. And then I had an early dinner and I was walking back. And I guess that would be going east, right? So I go east. There's a river there. Is that the East River, I think?
Well,
Probably.
you got the East River on the east side, and then the west side you got the Hudson River of Manhattan.
Oh, I'm sorry. So maybe I was going west.
I think you were on the west side because I believe that's where George Washington met with his soldiers on the west side, because before he crossed the Hudson River into Jersey.
So I was walking along whatever. Maybe it was one of the rivers, and because I hit water, and I go, okay, well, if I go this way, I'm going to head towards the bridge towards Brooklyn, right? And so I figured, well, I'll just walk until I get tired, and then I'll get an Uber, right? And so sure enough, I'm walking. So I just had dinner or an early dinner where George Washington met with his officers. I take this long walk, and I'm walking up along the river, and I see this restaurant. That says, oh, Teddy Roosevelt used to drink here. And I go, well, shit, I got to stop here and have. So I had a piece of cake and a cup of coffee or tea at where Teddy Roosevelt used to eat as well. So I thought that was a great trip because I got to go to two restaurants where presidents used to eat at, and really good history. And then I caught my Uber there and went back to Brooklyn. But
I know this is getting off the topic, but since you brought this topic up, it's your fault, Pat. When I went out with a sergeant from the LA District Attorney's Investigative Bureau for the Rafael Ramos and Chin Win, who were assassinated police officers at NYPD, went for their celebration for Rafael Ramos. Me and the sergeant walked all the way from Midtown all the way down, I think it was Fifth Avenue, and we stopped off at McSorley's Pub. Now you need to go to McSorley's Pub.
I haven't been there yet, but I've heard about it. Yes,
McSorley's Pub is the oldest Irish pub in New York City, and has artifacts all over the walls of commissioners of New NYP, Teddy Roosevelt, you name it, and it's all sawdust. And the interesting thing about this, when I was working in construction before I came out west, I went there with a friend of mine. I wasn't old enough, but I looked older. And McSorley's Pub in 1973 did not allow women in McSorley's Pub at that time.
Wow.
Yep. And then they had no women's bed. But then later on, when I went back, they allowed women, and they had to build a special bathroom for the women. So it was kind of interesting. And then imagine the 1970s not allowing women into McSorley's Pub.
Yeah, that is odd. And I will say the oldest continuing operating Irish pub in Europe, it's in Ireland. It's called Sean's Bar, SEAN, opened up in 900 AD. I can't believe that. I stopped there. I had to stop there when I was in Ireland. And I have my next show tomorrow. I'm going to have a guy named Steve Friend, and he was an accountant in Colorado Springs. Well, I go to Colorado Springs office. Jack Quinn's 1875.
Wow.
So I try to find the old pubs in the area that are still operating, and of course operating. Hey, thank you to Penny for joining us. Cam, I know I didn't respond to you on some of your stuff, but I don't think this is based upon the Greeks, but the 300.
Oh well.
But could it be?
No,
is it?
It's not 300. It's the Battle of Cunax. After the Battle of Cunax, 1,000 or so Greek soldiers were cut off from reinforcement in the middle of enemy territory, and they had to get back to Greece by their own means. And the event is called the Anabasis, or the March of the 10,000.
So yeah, so they were hired by the Persians. The Persians lost, and they had to fight their way back. I think is what it was to Greece. Is that it? Yeah, I did read that, but it's not based upon the 300. It is based upon other Greek history. Well, the other thing I want to talk about. Let's on the tracks and the ladies. So let's roll that scene. This is where I think one of the Swan is broken off from his regular crowd or the rest of his team, and him and I guess his future love interest, Mercy from the orphans. Or she's an orphan, so now she's with him, and they escape by going on the tracks, which would have been is potential death. You can get down there, but also it's rats down there, all kinds of stuff down there you don't want to see. But that's hey, if you're a gang member, this is part of the life, right? If you want to escape, you're willing to go on the tracks, right? And did you ever do that, Ralph, when you were in New York, or did you?
No, I stayed away from
the warning signs. Huh?
Yeah, no, I never had to run from anybody down there. No, not that I'm going to admit to.
I mean, you were a teenager, so I mean, even teenagers who aren't in the mix do dumb stuff, right? But so I saw them do this, but yeah, he's willing to get the heck out of there. And they're willing to go on the tracks. And then the other thing, I called the ladies, the Lizzies. And I thought this was interesting. So because the other part of the crew, or one part of the crew, I think our guy has already been arrested by the cops because after the baseball Furies, he decides to try and get some loving from some ladies sitting on a park bench, and she ends up being, I think, a cop, and he ends up going to jail. Thinking with the wrong head here. And they told him that at the time, you're not using your right brain there. But he gets arrested, and the other group, they get picked up by some ladies, and they end up in an apartment with them having a party, and they called themselves the Lizzies. And all I could think of, Ralph, when I saw this scene was the Rainbow Crips. Do you remember them?
No, I don't.
You didn't hear it. So on the transit system, we had a group of mostly lesbians, black lesbians, and they were just wreaking havoc, and they called themselves the Rainbow Crips. So it would have been, when did we deal with them? Oh, I think probably 85 to, not 85, 2005 to probably 2012, 2015. So they were active on our system, just causing havoc. They were doing robberies and strong arms and things like that. And then they'd get in fights with each other. I mean, it was crazy. And they'd harass passengers and things like that. But they were called themselves the Rainbow Crips. And I'm surprised you never heard of them, but we did.
No, no, but Pat, that doesn't surprise me of gangs using the women as tools and using the sex to entice the rival gangs. I mean, I remember, working the gangs in LA, they called it a subgroup called Las Señoras, which is, the female gangs, and also, down in Central America, when I was working down there, I mean, we were warned by Dan Weber, who was the resident security officer of the embassy, saying to us when we were working there more than a week, they give us a briefing. Don't go to these restaurants, don't go to these strip joints, don't go this, don't go, and they give you. But those ladies are used by the gangs to manipulate police officers, business people, to entice them, especially in the strip joints. They had there, and one of the places in El Salvador was called Lips. It was a strip joint, and they would also, resident security officer Dan Weber told us, don't ever go there. Don't even go there with some of the El Salvadorian police officers and stuff, because you don't know what you're stepping into in regards to using the women to, can potentially negatively impact you and your safety. I mean, look what happened in Colombia with Secret Service during Barack Obama time. They used the prostitutes to gather intel and stuff, and I mean, so it's out there. It's out there, and so in this movie, I thought it was really comical. I mean, you could see it like a left jab coming at you, and these guys just were seeing only one thing. And like you said, they were thinking with the wrong head. And then once the door locked, the slide lock, and the girl pulled a gun. She was a bad shot too. So
Terrible shot.
I mean. She couldn't hit anything, but the thing about it was that it's out there. It's used daily. I mean, it always has been.
Well, it was interesting that we had a lesbian street gang work in LA, and then these Lizzies were, the suggestion is they're lesbians as well, and of course they're willing to use their feminine wilds here to catch these guys. I think what you're talking about, Ralph, is commonly referred to as a honey trap, right?
Yep. Yeah.
That's a honey trap.
Yeah.
And a honey trap is they'll use, if you're into gals, they'll use a beautiful gal to entice you in. And I think Eric, one of our Eric Swalwell was he's one of our House of Representatives up north, and he was in a honey trap with a Chinese lady, right? So
he denies everything, of course,
Yeah. But it does happen, and they entice you in with, so if somebody looks like me and I got a good look at 20-year-old that's interested in me, she's not interested in me. There's some ulterior reasons there. Ralph. Probably you and me both, right? So that's just the way it is. And they, so you have to realize if you have something of value to them, it's probably not you. It's what you have, or what you can give them. Yep. And why are they going to invite these 4 warriors in? Are they suddenly? And so, anyways, they get caught in the honey trap. And yes, Monkey, it does look like a gang of lesbians.
They are a gang of lesbians
that can't shoot straight, so they got to go to the range. And one of the interesting things I did in my research is because nobody had anything, right? This was the other thing. New York was on its knees. A lot of the middle class left for the suburbs, and they were replaced by immigrants from Puerto Rico and other places, and they didn't have money. And so they said they couldn't afford guns. They just didn't exist at the time, right? The gangs weren't, probably not in the drug stuff as much yet. They definitely get there, and they can certainly afford guns, but they said that at the time, 60s, 70s, there just wasn't the money. The gangs just didn't have that kind of money. They were doing crimes, but it wasn't able to fund buying them handguns, which were, I guess, probably expensive in the city at the time. And that's probably why we didn't see too many. We only saw the Rogues had a gun, right? Which they kind of gingerly handled like it was a prized possession, if you remember that. Mm-hmm. And then the Lizzies here had a gun. which is consistent with what your experiences in the 70s, right? There weren't a lot of guns.
I think Pat, the guns were there. It's like you said, they didn't have the finances to do it, but they were available to the gang members. Um, I also believe that at the time that when the police did get you with a gun, that it did mean something, and it was a significant sentence by you. Where now it's been, kind of, it's just they don't pursue these things like they used to. And I just think the finances weren't there, but also the organizations of syndicates and gangs. It's because gangs have just evolved to syndicates now. And you mentioned the Puerto Ricans, there's the Dominicans, the Cubans, the Colombians in New York, and it's notched up so many different levels where now cartels are now controlling these gangs and funneling monies to them if you prove yourself as a good, a good worker, a leader,
Right.
and I don't mean good in a good sense. I mean, you're a bad people, but you're doing the work.
An effective,
Yes,
an effective
effective.
member.
Yes, and you're a producer. You produce. So I mean, the weapons are more available to those people now than ever before.
Ralph was on my other show, Briefing with the Chief, and you can go back on KJRA's DB.com, go to shows and host tab, and go to Briefing with the Chief tab, and you can find the show where we talked about drug cartels and the border. And what Ralph is talking about is the integration of the drug cartels or the infiltration throughout the country, even into Anchorage, Alaska. I used a map there that showed it. And with the border being open as it is now, it's only being we're getting much more entrenched because they're sending their soldiers up north, right? They're sending their earners up north to make money. In fact, I did a commentary on TNT radio, actually Friday, but I had done one a previous time where I talked about San Francisco. They had some guy that was accusing the cops of being racist. There was Latino police officers arresting Latinos who were selling fentanyl on Skid Row, or their version of Skid Row in the Tenderloin district up there. And the public defender who's elected there said that all the cops are just racist. They're just targeting these people of color who are selling the fentanyl. They're not going after anybody else. And the sergeant of the team says, first of all, I'm Latino. My team are all Latinos. The people selling the drug is Latinos, and they're selling them for the cartels, right? And this is what is going on throughout our country with fentanyl, methamphetamine, and some other drugs of choices. That's why the border is so important. I mean, do you agree with that? I mean, I'm kind of preaching, Ralph, but do you agree with that?
I agree, 100%. So 100%. And I'll tell you right now. I mean, we are just failing the future of our country. We're failing your grandchildren, my future grandchildren, Martine's future grandchildren. We're truly failing. These so-called leaders of this country are failing us. And when you mentioned, Pat, gangs, cartels, they're in every state of the United States. And when I was working in Central America in the Intel Center in San Salvador, we came upon the detectives from the Policía Nacional from El Salvador came upon, and so did the FBI, came upon a 503 program, which gave the rules and regulations what they will do. And they accomplished it, which meant our MS is in almost every state in the United States also, and settling in, proving themselves to be good workers, but also they're spreading the disease of gang life and a syndicate to spread, the drug distribution, which the cartels link up with the gangs, the street gangs. So if you look at our country, and I don't mean to lecture, but I have to give you this word picture. You have a national street gangs. Those are like MS, 18th Street, Florencia, and the Brims and stuff, and the Bloods. Then you got prison gangs, right? And then you got motorcycle gangs. But then they used the local street gangs as the soldiers to be able to continue to spread that disease. And so this doesn't come from Ralph Ornelas. This comes from the National Gang Intelligence Center in Washington, D.C. and the feds and stuff like that. But I could see it, and you could see it. And it's that just like the plain as the nose on our faces that this is what's taking place, and we're getting played. We're getting played. That's what's happening, and the cartels are linking up with Middle Eastern terrorists too, and that's the frightening part.
Well, the other, what was that? We just had the murder of 6 people. I want to say in the desert. I want to say it was San Bernardino. Do you remember? See that headline, Ralph? And they were part of a group of people working for transnational criminal organizations from Mexico
Yep.
and China, right? And apparently they got on the wrong side of the cartel, and they were all 6 guys murdered one place recently. I think it was 2 weeks ago.
Yep.
And if that doesn't wake people up that we got a problem, I think nothing else will. But we're going to see more and more of that, because that means they're emboldened enough that they feel they can murder 6 people at a time and then probably flee across the border and be untouched. That's what's going on, and that's what's it's why we have to close the border. You can say whatever you want about immigration, Latinos, and all this other stuff, but we really need to know who's coming, and going.
But Pat and Martine, it's not just the Latinos anymore. It's the Chinese, the Iranians, the Russians. I mean, Middle Eastern, countries that dislike us and have an agenda. And hey, listen. You're looking at a man that had both his grandparents come from Mexico illegally initially, and then became the most proud moment. They became citizens of the United States and assimilated. You know why? Because they felt this was the greatest country in the world. Well, I'm telling you, what really hurts me a lot is to see what is going on, allowing all these people to come over, have no borders. We have a process to vet you through to become a legal citizen of the United States. What's taking place right now is beyond my imagination. We'd ever have this when I was growing up, is to have people coming over. Just come on over, free medical, free this, free that. Well, guess what? Nothing's free.
No, somebody's got to pay for it.
Martine's paying it, Pat's paying for it, I'm paying for it. Your son who's doing so well, Pat, he's paying for it. Your daughter's paying for it, who's a nurse. My daughter and my son's paying for it. And something, it's not fair because what are we going to make our country look like? We've always been the most diverse country in the world. We accepted people, but come over legally. And we're allowing people to come over. We have no idea what they really are, or what their philosophical approach, or what their true agenda is.
Unfortunately, I think we're going to go through a cycle where we have increased violence, and then we're going to move back again. Somebody asked me, "What's it going to take?" I said, "1 victim at a time." To talk about the gangs and their interaction with the cartels. We did another show. We did the Sicario, right? I think I had you on with John. And we did that.
We did.
And so if you're a pop culture minefield aficionado, go back and watch our show on Sicario, and they have a great scene there where they're using the gang members as soldiers to try and take out somebody that they've kidnapped from, I think it was Juarez. I think that
Juarez.
Yeah, they were taking them back across the border, this tactical team. And so you can see that they're doing these things. We just had a murder of 6 people, no doubt that. I don't know if those were cartel people who did that or they were just soldiers. Well, I'm sure the soldiers just did the murders for these guys. So this stuff is happening in the U.S. It's also happening to a great degree in Mexico and in the Southern Cone right there. That's what they're dealing with in Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua, and the other places as well, right?
Well, Pat, I think I mentioned this with John, and I think John might have disagreed with me a little bit, but that's okay. I love having discussions like that. But I really believe, talking to my retired friends from the FBI, we converse, is I think we have to classify the cartels as a terrorist group.
Yeah.
And
they are terrorists.
Yes, yeah. Martine knows them.
Martine, you and I are on the same page, I believe. And but if we classify them that, we could use other resources to be able to mitigate that. And we're not doing it because we don't have the proper leadership at the top. And we don't have the proper leadership in the Attorney General's office or the head of the DHS and stuff. I mean, we have softy cones. You know what I mean by softy cones? You remember the ice cream that melts in your hand so damn fast, right? And we have appeasers. We have people appease. So I gotta get this out of my brain real quick, Pat. To you, I hope you don't mind, and Martine. When we worked gangs, we did association warrants. I think I said this before. What it allowed us to do is to get into these homes and get intel. Guess what? I don't even think we're doing that as much anymore. And so
No.
this is the sad part, because it's like we go in a boxing ring. If you only throw a left jab, you're not going to win. You got to throw combinations. And right now, we're not throwing combinations.
Well, they're trying to dismantle the great system, which was the gang something or other. I can't remember the name of it, but where we used to do those relationship warrants using the data that was collected by gang investigators for decades. They've said that they're incorrect, and
Yeah.
they just want to shut them down.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's the ACLU. The ACLU also supported Prop 47, and look at what we got. So let's go ahead and roll the next scene as we go with our discussion. And I got this roller skates punks, and it's interesting that I thought, okay, this is unrealistic. I saw this guy on roller skates following Swan here, and he realizes that they're after him. He's got his little orphan girlfriend there, and his friends show up, and they end up taking out the punks. It's one of the things I noticed is there's a lot of people wearing sunglasses too. I just wrote that down. Sunglasses in the basement. I think everybody's got sunglasses on in the basement, and which I thought was interesting. But here's the thing: public bathrooms, Ralph. When I was working the transit system, there was always a discussion: should we have public bathrooms? And in LA, did they not build transit stations with a lot of? There was a handful of public bathrooms. We had them at Union Station, but they stayed away from public bathrooms because it was such a problem. And so here we are, a public bathroom and the transit system in New York. I have not been on it enough in New York to know whether there were public bathrooms. Were there public bathrooms in the transit system, and would they even be used?
Yes. And I got to share a story with you. This is 1977, 78. Okay, my wife and a few of our friends, about 8 couples, went to see Chorus Line, and it was during the wintertime. And my wife, my girlfriend at the time, not my wife, but she's my wife now, she got sick and had to use the ladies' bathroom. And so everybody got on the subway, and we were left alone. And here I am with an overcoat and a suit and a hat on, and here are these 2 thugs walking by, one time by me, a second time by me, and now, this is God's honest truth, Pat and Martine, I pulled a Godfather tactic. So the third time they walked by me, and now my wife is sick, throwing up inside the bathroom. I could hear them. We're the only people on this platform. The third time they walked by, I opened my overcoat and put my hand in my like in my jacket. I swear to God, I put my hand in my jacket, and I gave them a look like the head look, how you doing, and I got my hand, and meanwhile I'm actually holding my heart. It's beating out of my chest, thinking, please God, can a cop come by? Well, 2 minutes later, here comes these 2 cops. I wave them, come over here, and they come over to me. They waited outside to my wife, my girlfriend at the time. They got us on the train. One of them went with us on the train until we got to the next station to Long Island. And I gotta tell you, man, but there is bathrooms. They're ugly as shit. I mean, I'm telling you, man, especially
only emergencies, right? They're only emergency bathrooms.
Especially in the 70s, they were not cared for. I don't know who the hell was taking care of them, but I mean, I couldn't wait to get out of that subway. I'm telling you like that. And the next day when I saw my cousin, I go, how could you leave me? I mean, just.
Well, I'm glad I asked that question because it's interesting that for all the movie aficionados, this is Michael Corleone goes to visit his dad and realizes that the bodyguards have been pulled off, and there was no police, nobody watching his dad who tried to do the assassination attempt on Vito, right?
Right.
And Flores comes to visit his dad, and
the baker
comes to visit his dad, and because he's been good to his dad, and he's not a mobster. And nope. Michael's at the time is not a mobster, and Michael knows what's going on. He moves his dad to another room, and then he gets the baker to stick around, and they stand out front and pretend like they're a couple of hoods. And as Ralph says, as the car of hoods is going to come and finish off their dad rolls up, Michael opens up a jacket, reaches inside to his jacket. He's not armed, but that's what Ralph was talking about, the Godfather scene. So the mobster theme seems. Hey, so
Yeah.
good. Thanks for bringing that in, Ralph. Very interesting story.
That reminds me that a good friend of mine, he got out of a very tight situation with a tactic like that.
Hey, Martine, let me tell you something, man. I got to go change my drawers later on. I'm telling you right now.
Well, I couldn't imagine if they're worried about the trains running on time, they're probably not taking care of the bathrooms. And I always argued against, because I had to go to meetings. So they would have these big meetings as they constructed new train lines, right? So I would go to the meetings because I sent some folks to Cessped, which is a community. It's basically, if you look at the design of something, how do you design it to maximize the likelihood to reduce crime or to add infrastructure that would allow you to reduce crime? And so I started going to their design to build meetings so that we could integrate. We had the appropriate infrastructure put in place so that we can then put cameras in place and do other things, and that they would design the train stations to maximize the likelihood of safety. So lighting, seating, that kind of stuff. And I was always against bathrooms. They asked me what I thought. I said, I'll end up having to put cops right outside bathrooms all the time. And so they never really embraced it, right?
But bathrooms are tricky because, they may be useful, sometimes necessary, but they sooner or later they become a trap for criminals.
Yeah, if you put them at major hubs and you have the hubs are well staffed with transit personnel and security, then it's doable. But if you you can't do it at these remote locations. It's just, there's no way you can keep people safe. It's never a good idea. So,
But Pat, when they built these back in the day, I mean, we didn't have the population, the crime level when they built those things and these bathrooms. And I gotta tell you, those bathrooms are horrific. I'm telling you right now. I mean, I would never go in there. Anymore. I never did after that. I never did.
well, I don't blame you. I don't blame you. So, okay. So our next scene that I wanted to talk about is, we're going to be finished off the meeting. I think I only have one more scene. So we got a little bit of talking to do, and that is home to Coney Island. But Ralph, I wanted to use this time to ask you, I've never been to Coney Island, and I have no idea. And first of all, what was it like in the 70s? And is it the same way now? You always hear Coney Island, there's an amusement park there. Explain, what is Coney Island? Is it a neighborhood, or is it just a location in which a neighborhood is built around it? Explain it for the audience.
Coney Island is an area on the water where it was a lot of, entertainment, the beach, Ferris wheel, food, Nathan's hot dogs, contests, strength contests. They had beauty contests. It's on the south part of Brooklyn, along the water, and it was a really gathering place. It was a lot of people would come there. Some people never went there. I mean, there's people from the Bronx never left the Bronx. There's people who grew up in certain parts of Brooklyn never went to Coney Island, which was outside of Brooklyn. It was sometimes viewed as people that had more money, where if you didn't have money, but, eventually everybody gravitated, once in their life to Coney Island from New York to see it. But, when I was younger and teenager, it was kind of rough around the edges. Now I understand. I haven't been there for a while, a long time. It's upgraded itself. But during my time, it was rough around the edges, just like you saw in the movie. It was beat down during that time in the 70s, because why? The monies people weren't investing. It was run down. It was dirty, a lot of dreads and stuff. So, when I understand now, it's built up, and some new monies that have got into that area, just like everything, and just like Williamsburg and Brooklyn, and, a gentrification where it was all basically buildings of construction or factories. Now it's all changed.
So before air conditioning, right? In the city, before air conditioning, you can imagine that it would get really hot in the tenements. You get really hot, and even the wealthy people, if you didn't have air conditioning, you were looking for, the wealthy people would have a house on the beach, right? They'd be able to go to their house on the beach.
Yeah.
But for the city residents, I can imagine back in probably the 30s, the 40s, and the 50s. Coney Island was one of those places they would go to get away from the heat, right? They could get onto the coast, and a place where
Yeah.
they can enjoy. I mean, probably Atlantic City wasn't too far. They could get there if they had a little bit of money. To me, that's what I think Coney Island was about, right? That was a place for people to escape from the oppressive heat. Because, when you have a city like New York and it's all concrete, it gets warm, right? And there's no place
Yeah.
to go.
Yeah, but people would go along the East River, in the East River, and just kind of hanging out near the water to feel the breeze sometimes. But I think back when you just kind of just verbally stated, where my father and my cousins and we would go up on top of the roof, during the summertime when it's hot, and during the nighttime we try to sleep up there, my cousins and I, and that's why I used to love that song, "Up on the Roof," and so we would go up there to cool off at night, and because we didn't have air conditioning, we had a fan in a bedroom, the railroad track, apartments. One in the one part of the apartment, only to the other, and have two fans kind of circulating the air, but it was all hot air coming and going when it was 90 degrees and 90% humidity. So you didn't really get that cool, but that's why we went up on the roof at night and sleep.
Well, so the other thing about Coney Island, I got to ask was it a working class neighborhood that was surrounded Coney Island?
Yes, yeah, you
Yeah.
did. You had working class, like my mom and dad and stuff. We're not too far from there, but then it was Howard Beach nearby, which was a little bit more affluent, people. It's a real mixture. You get to certain areas of Brooklyn where you had some of the Italians, but then you had some of the Jewish people, and it was a real mixture of people. And I think that's what was kind of beautiful about Brooklyn, is that you really had a mixture, of everybody, and it was truly a melting pot. Going to parks. We played basketball, football, stickball, or box ball, and guess what? You interact with everybody, and I think that's what really made my life, so fulfilled, is getting to know how to deal with all different racial groups.
Well, in the city of Detroit, it was called Boblo Island. They had kind of a place like that. It was right along the river across from Windsor, because we had the Detroit River. So, they had, I don't want to say it was like, it was Coney Island like. I mean, it was a park and they had rides and things like that. But, yeah, cities have to, when they build infrastructure, for big cities like New York, they have to have places where people can go to let off steam, right? And they have to have, and it's those places, they service different people of different,
Yep.
different,
Demographics.
demographics. I mean, I grew up blue collar, and there was a place in Chicago, or not in Chicago, it was in Ohio. We'd go called Cedar Point amusement park that you go to, and that's in the summertime you need to get away, because I think we got air conditioning probably in the 70s. But Detroit's an interesting town because it's like 400 square miles, so it's big like LA, but it didn't have the population of LA, so it was more spread out. Whereas New York it's stacked on top of each other, right? It's just dense, and so everybody's on top of each other, and so escaping the heat, going out and to your backyard isn't going to do it, because you don't have a backyard. You have a roof,
Right.
you have
Right.
maybe a balcony, right? And I mean, in the day I saw that they would place in tenements, they had caged areas outside their windows. I don't know if you ever saw this. And they would put like a little mattress out there, and they'd put their infants out there, and so that they could get their fresh air. Did you ever see that? I mean, I saw old pictures of that from probably the 1920s, 1930s, where they would put their kids in these little cages that were just outside the window, almost like a garden window, only it was a cage, basically, so that they could be cooled off. They can get the cool
Yeah.
the cool weather in the summertime at nighttime. It's interesting stuff. So one of the things I wanted to talk about this last scene, and maybe Martine, if you can show it just again, right at the beginning, I thought it was the most iconic scene, and it's when David Patrick, he doesn't show
Kelly,
it. I mean,
David Patrick Kelly.
He's got the bottles on his hand. Do you see that?
Oh,
Warriors come out
yeah,
to play.
I
I thought I had gotten this at the beginning of this. I didn't, but I thought that was probably the most iconic scene because you hear the sound, and
Yeah.
I was listening to an interview years ago. I listened to it, and he came up with that himself, where he
Hmm.
where he was doing that, and they decided to put it in the movie because you're not going to hear it as loud as it was from the car to where the Warriors were standing. So obviously they amplified it. But you hear the noise and you think, what the hell is that noise, right? What the hell is that when you hear it in the movie? What the hell is that noise? And then you hear his screeching, it sounds like the, fingers on a chalkboard kind of voice, Warriors come out to play, and he's just doing this sound with the bottles. And I thought, I mean, there were a lot of interesting things about the show, but I thought that was iconic. That scene and what he was saying. What do you think, Martine?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ah, man. Yeah, this guy was bonkers. The way that in which he really thinks he can take the Warriors, even though they are even in Warriors territory, and he just taunts them with and annoys them with the voice and the sounds and there we have how
He
things
can
finish.
yeah. Obviously, it's interesting. You're able to throw a switchblade knife and it goes in him. I mean, that's a knife throwing. But yeah, he's the screeching. What'd you think, Ralph? Same thing. Iconic scene. The bottles. When you first heard the noise, did you? I didn't know what that was when I first heard that noise, and that scene sticks with me all the time when I hear the two bottles clanging together now, or a couple bottles clanging together. That's an iconic scene for you.
Yeah, I thought it was really good creativity by David Patrick Kelly or the director to use that because I was wondering what created that sound until they focused in on him in the car clicking with his fingers with all the bottles of Coca-Cola bottles or 7-Up or whatever. I think they covered every company on his fingers. I'd be honest with you.
Yeah.
That was good. That was good marketing on his part. But I thought it was very interesting, and I thought it kind of added to the suspense of the movie. And David Patrick Kelly, I think he's a really great actor, and he also played in Beverly Hills Cop with James Remar, and I don't know if you remember, he was his partner in Beverly Hills Cop where they hid all the money. But it was a very interesting ending. And I gotta give Swan kudos of throwing a switchblade into the guy's arm, but I want to know where that bullet went that David Patrick Kelly shot.
Yeah.
I mean, being that close within 2 feet, I couldn't believe he didn't hit anybody. So I was expecting after the shot that maybe the girl got shot. Because maybe that relationship with Swain and her, but that was a mystery round that went someplace. But it was an interesting ending, and with the riffs coming, and more or less they're going to take over the Patrick Kelly's gang. I forget what was the name of that gang. I can't remember.
Rogues, the Rogues.
Rogues, yeah, the Rogues. Yeah, they that's how much they impressed me, the Rogues. But it was a good ending, and how they went off into the beach, and that's how it ended. But and then I think at the end was Miss Thigpen came on with a song again, right? And basically said, hey, it's over, and the Warriors are free to go, and the Riffs got control, but
I think she does a tribute to
sorry
them.
we tried to kill you and all that. Here's the song.
Here's the song for you. And so there is pride of the neighborhood, right? If you join one of these cliques, Ralph, you have to stand up. They're on their home turf. They can't just turn their backs. They got to fight, right? That pride of the neighborhood is part of it. Not whether whether in New York or I think the early part of the Crips and the Bloods and some of the Latino sets, T Flats or wherever. It was pride of the neighborhood, and sticking up for your neighborhood was part of that, right? I mean, it transitioned into some serious crime stuff, but when they get back to Coney Island, they gotta stand up. They just can't. They can't keep running, right?
No, they reached homeland, and they're in their territory where they feel they have the pride and the support of maybe other people that we didn't see in the movie, but that's the movie's director leading it up to, I believe, and leaves that suspense out there to you to think that way, as the whole community respects them. Probably not, maybe so, who knows? But
no, the community don't respect them. They fear them.
Well, that's true. That's true.
No,
They do
Chief.
fear him.
There is another
That's-
connection with John Wick.
Yeah, I know. I saw David Patrick Kelly
Yes,
was I can't remember which John Wick he was
the
in
cleaner. He's the cleaner.
He's the cleaner. Yeah, but oh yeah, so he's probably in all of them. He does a regular gig.
Oh, 1 and 2.
1 and 2. Okay. Yeah, he's an interesting guy. I looked him up just because I thought, and he's from Detroit, so that's my hometown. But he has had a good career
Yes.
as a character actor. And
Yep, absolutely.
so I got to ask, we're closing up here, but Martine, I was given a contact from a guy, and maybe I'll ask Ralph here, but I got to get somebody from New York. He's a cameraman. He wrote a book. And what's his name now? I can't remember his name now, but he was a cameraman on the movie Taxi Driver.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
And it's a crime theme, so it certainly will fit for my show. And he was recommended to me, and he wants to come on my show. So I'll have to reach out to him, and I need to get. I was thinking either Johnny B or you, Ralph. But I like Johnny B. He does all this research on the movies. John Bayless and.
John Bayless. Oh man.
Yeah, he does. He likes coming on, and he does some pretty good research. And
Tell him I said hello.
I will, but I want to bring this guy on. I think he'll be a lot of fun. I've had an actor on before. I got Kevin Major Howard. A couple of times, and he was great. So I thought, you know what, I'll reach out to this guy and maybe I can get him on. He's done a couple of things. I can't remember the other. He's done a lot of television shows. But when I transition into doing some television shows, I could bring him on. But hey, Ralph, thank you for coming on. This was a great discussion. We got to get in a little bit in New York, and you always have pride for the city you're from. I was so happy that the Michigan Wolverines won the
yeah. Congratulations.
I was hoping the Detroit Lions would end up in the Super Bowl and win as well. And so I can understand your allegiance to New York, and whether you're in a gang or not, you got to stand up for your neighborhood, right? Or at least your city. And so I appreciate you coming on again. I like to get the realism of what was actually going on in the 70s. I think we actually did that this show. I hope that the folks who joined us in the audience, Cam, and everybody else, thank you for coming on board. Martine, I think we're just about done here. Thank you for jumping in as the second guest here. I hope you had a good time doing it instead of pushing buttons. Yeah. So, all right, guys, I think, Martine, we are ready to go, and you can take it away, and Ralph will see you. Stick around for a debrief.
Bye.
Adios.